Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Corey Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. Today we have Adam Paul in the studio with us. Adam is a friend of mine, and he's somebody that I have grown to respect over the last 5 years that I've known him, and is actually pretty involved with me raising my sons. He's an advisor to them in the neighborhood. They do lots of activities together. We're going to Moab and doing some mountain biking here in a couple of weeks together. And I'm grateful for guys like Adam in my son's lives to have somebody that they can trust that's not their dad. And he happens to also be a licensed therapist. So I don't know if we need to do any disclaimers today, but this is not health advice specifically for the things that Adam will say, but we are pretty stoked to have Adam with us today. He is a licensed therapist and deals specifically with adolescent boys and the challenges that they're facing in today's world. So get your notebook out because we're gonna have lots of good things to absorb today. Welcome, Adam.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Adam, tell us a little bit about your family. You work specifically with boys, but at home it's a little different.
At home, I have two daughters. I have a 21-year-old she's doing amazing. She's a junior in college. And then I have a 16-year-old who can't wait to get out of high school as quickly as possible. And so I go home and deal with estrogen, and I go to work and deal with testosterone. So it's a good balance for me.
So you've been a therapist for 21 years now.
21 years. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Started off working with juvenile justice. So judges would send me boys. I was just a staff member, worked for my uncle, who was a director at that time, and just kind of getting through college, and I fell in love with doing the work. I knew that it was really important for me to enjoy what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was going to be a CPA until this job, and took one accounting class, and no offense to those accountants out there, but it wasn't for me, and went in this totally different direction. I knew that as I worked with the young men that I needed to go in a way to specialize with family relationships. And so that's why I just chose marriage and family therapy, even though I knew I was going to be working with adolescent boys with their issues, that the marriage and family route was the best because I could see the impact that marriages and the family system had on these boys individually. I also saw how we could work really hard with a young man, but if we didn't help change the system at home, then it was all null and void within days once they returned home.
So you kind of have like a disruptive form of therapy though, right? Like some of these young men come and like you have office hours and you see people, but you also have this business that the boys come and they live.
They live there 24/7
on site.
Yeah, we have our own school, so we are accredited school. We can give out diplomas and so forth. We do lots of recreation. That's a key component as well. Tons of recreation, opportunities to get outside, to socialize. We're on the mountain skiing every Wednesday and Saturday. We're mountain biking and doing different things. We do triathlons as well with the boys and help them to find something that helps physically and try to be well-rounded that way, along with the therapy, yes. So we have a 24/7 staffing. As a therapist, I'm there pretty much 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, but also on call 24/7 also. So, and helping them through that.
Man, what a lifestyle.
How long have you been doing this, and how many boys do you think have been through kind of your program or your homes?
We've had about 600 through our homes. We were opened about 15 years ago. I used to work for the state, and that was great. The bureaucracy got tough, and also the caseloads. So, for example, when I was working with a state provider, I had 22 boys on my caseload, and now I have 5. And so I can essentially do the work that I know works on the private side of things versus the public side of things, which is unfortunate. We need to have more opportunities for kids on the public side, but the system needs some help.
So talk to us a little bit about what are these boys going through? Why are they typically there, which might lead to the how behind how you help them, Right.
A lot of them are there for substance abuse, and that's kind of the tipping point for parents. And for most of our parents, they start failing in school, and then they dig into why they're failing in school, and they find out they're using. And I won't go into how COVID has affected all that, because it's definitely made an impact this past year. But, well, really all COVID has done is made it really evident, the problems, because the boys have been stuck at home. And so it's just really obvious and parents have been stuck at home working as well. And so it's hard to avoid what's going on at that point. But, they use because it helps. It's a coping mechanism for them. It helps them with their depression, helps with their anxiety, helps with their ADHD, helps with sometimes there's been trauma that's happened to them. There's a lot of bullying that goes on, especially now with social media and so forth. And so it helps them cope. And really, if I have one message that gets through today, it would be that the parents have those discussions about those hard things with their kids. They want so badly to be heard and to be understood, but they are so afraid of letting parents down. And so it's just easier to turn to substances, which they do help. And so if we have, as parents, say, oh, it's not fun to use drugs or it's not fun to drink, we sound really stupid, because it is. It's fun to get drunk and it's fun to be high. For how long, though? And that's one of the tools that we talk about often, is playing the tape to the end. And then what? Okay, then after you've had your episode, then what happens? And then what happens? And what happens in school? What happens to important relationships? What happens to your goals and aspirations in life? What happens to the things that used to be important to you? A lot of our boys are very accomplished, whether it be in sports or in the arts, very creative, amazing kids that substances take away that passion that they used to have. Because that's what substances do. They become the most important thing. We joke about it being the selfish girlfriend, the psycho girlfriend that only wants to have you in their life. That's why the substances happen too. And so we use an amazing model. It's called the 7 Challenges. And the 7 Challenges is the only substance abuse model used for and designed for an adolescent. And there's amazing models out there, but this is the only one that's made for an adolescent who is in the stage of development of their life that they are trying to figure out who they are, that identity creation process. Also, other models, again, I love the 12-step. A 12-step model is amazing. But an adolescent boy has a hard time with a higher power. They just do. That's a very abstract thought for them, and they're very concrete in their thinking. And it's hard to believe in a higher power when you think you are one. And
good point.
That's what teenagers do often.
So you're trying to show them, short-term fixes versus long-term fixes, short-term happiness versus long-term happiness, realizing that, it does make you feel better right now,
right,
but you're going to ruin your entire rest of your life. So you go through these 7 steps. Is that a core component of how you get them back?
It is. And I think, again, being very honest with them is the first part. And that is actually the first challenge, is being open and honest. Let's be real with one another. And that's what I suggest parents do also. Sit down with your kids, have very real, hard conversations with them, and not shy away from them, but lean into them and talk about substances, talk about pornography, talk about other things that can be, anything that can be addictive. Social media and phones and video games and anything that can hold them back potentially and become, again, more important than the more important things in their lives. And then helping them, really what it is a decision-making model. Our goal is to help. We don't expect them to be abstinent from these things the rest of their lives. And that's too big a concept for a teenager to think that, oh yeah, I'm going to be sober. I'm never going to have a beer the rest of my life, or I'm never going to touch that substance the rest of my life. I'm never going to, that's too big. You remember what it was like sitting in high school, looking at the clock with 15 minutes to go in class and watching that secondhand. 15 minutes is an eternity. At least it was for me. It's that click, click. It's like, oh, this is horrible. And so for them, thinking about 5 years down the road, no way.
Yeah, not really a way that you want to live your life.
No, it's too hard. It's too far down there. And so helping them make good decisions and take into account the pros, the cons, what their accountability is, what their future is going to look like if they make this choice, and helping them understand that each choice either gets us closer or farther away from where we want to be. and just breaking it down in those simple terms, but huge life skill as far as making decisions, making thoughtful decisions, because the adolescent brain wants to make a very impulsive, I want to feel good now. I want these people to like me now. I want to be as cool as that person now. I want to, again, feel good. And that's where, again, the anxiety and depression, it works so well. Really, the drugs do work really well in the moment, because typically they just stop caring. They stop caring about, again, what's most important, what they know to be real. And they see that stress, they see all stress as harmful to their happiness, whether it be stress from school or stress from a coach or stress from a parent, stress from future graduation, whatever it may be. They see that's horrible. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to look into that. I want to avoid that. And of course, as we know as adults, there's no avoiding those things. We can pretend that they're not there. And like I used to do when I was a teenage boy, and my mom asked me to clean my room, I would push everything underneath the bed. It didn't solve anything. It just made my room stinkier eventually, where my friends didn't want to come in my room anymore. And it's really embarrassing, because it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't address what's really going on.
So the number one problem is substance abuse.
No, I would say the number one problem is not understanding their emotions. Boys, just like girls, are very emotional beings. But in our society, we don't celebrate. It's not cool to be emotional. It's not cool to cry for men. I'm guessing maybe you guys have had discussions about crying and so forth. I hope so. We don't give our boys enough license to be emotional. We don't connect with them when they get emotional. We start to get uncomfortable when they get emotional instead of being there with them. And so the number one reason, and so it comes out in substances, I guess.
Gotcha.
Substances use it's a symptom of the problem.
Coping mechanism.
Yeah, that's what it is. Especially with a teenager. We don't see kids that are physiologically addicted like you would down the street. You don't see look at the adults, it's different. They are physiologically addicted. Teenagers, no. Now, is it impacting their brains? Absolutely. Is it hardwiring them? Absolutely. But they're so malleable and so flexible and so capable. It's more about, hey, yeah, I am feeling things very deeply, and I don't know how to put words to it. I don't know how to express it. I don't know who to tell, because I don't know who to trust with these things. I feel like a freak. I feel like I'm the only one. I look on my social media and I see all these people just amazing, and I'm struggling. I'm barely getting by. I feel like a fraud.
Yeah.
Can we just say that social media is not real? And I hope the kids can understand that, those that might listen to this.
Yeah.
It is frustrating, because that comparison piece is so damaging. And we as adults do it too, but comparing ourselves to others, it's guaranteed misery.
So Adam, talk to us, if there's parents listening today who don't know if their kids are dealing with some of these problems, because kids are really good at hiding things. They're good at hiding their feelings. They're good at hiding the way they feel towards their friends, and everything can just be fine and peachy. But inside they're really hurting. So talk to us about some of the signs that your son or daughter might be struggling with some of these things, like anxiety, depression, this comparison of not being enough, and substance abuse. Yeah. What are some of those warning signs?
Well, I think first it's really important. I think it's just assume that one or multiple of those things are happening.
Just assume it.
And then talk about it. Like I said, lean into it, have conversations about it, share experiences with it. I want to share one quick experience in my teenage life that helped change my life, really. Number one rule in my home growing up was respect your mom. Like, it was very, very clear. My dad traveled a ton, and my mom was there with 4 boys, and I was the oldest. And it was I'll never forget, again, this day. We had little anyway, my dad came home early from a trip. My brother, just younger than me, was sassing my mom. He was super sharp, still is, and just really cutting with words. And my dad overheard it, and he grabs my brother by the chest. My dad's a dairy farmer growing up. He's got forearms like Popeye. And he grabbed my brother by the shirt and picked him up and placed him against the wall with it, and kind of pumped his chest. Like, do not talk to your mom like this ever again. And there's probably more verbiage in there, but that's what I remember. And just kind of dropped my brother to the ground. And then we had a little shop off the side of the house where my dad would tinker with small engine things, snowmobiles and four-wheelers and so forth. And he said, I'm going to the shop. Let me know when dinner's ready. And he walked out the door. And the rest of us are kind of in shock as we're witnessing what just said, because that wasn't a common occurrence in my home. You know, my dad didn't lay hands on us too often, and especially with that kind of intensity. And mom just went about finishing up dinner and then said, Adam, go get your dad from the shop. Tell him dinner's ready. And I'm like, why me? Why do I have to go out and tell the bear that dinner's ready? I really don't want to go out there. She's like, Adam, get out there. So I walked the whole 15 feet that seemed like a mile, and I opened up the door, and what I witnessed when I opened the door, again, changed my life, because here I was at the time, 15, 16 years old myself, being a highly emotional individual, crying myself to sleep every once in a while, seemingly had it all going for me, but still struggling, still trying to figure out who I was, what life was about. Open up that door and see my dad curled up crying, just bawling. He didn't want to do what he did to my brother. He didn't want to hold that boundary with him. But for years, that's been the number one boundary. He knew he had to do it, and he held to it. But it was hard. And he was weeping. And he didn't have to say anything. Me seeing him in that state gave me an opportunity to, like, Adam, it's okay that you're emotional. It gave me permission to be an emotional person. And it told me, hey, if my dad is willing to do that and that happens for him, that's okay for me. And so told him dinner was ready. He said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. And I walked back in a different boy than I was. And so coming back to your question about, you know, what are the signs? Being a teenager is a sign. A lot of times they don't want to talk. They don't want to talk about the difficult things. So sharing things with them, sharing your own stuff, especially as dads for boys, let them know that you're not invincible, that you have vulnerabilities, that you had insecurities and have insecurities. Again, as dads, a lot of times we want to come across as this mountain of stability, which is great and also not accurate. You know, we weren't always like this, or we still struggle with things. So sharing them, normalizing emotion for them, and then helping them verbalize it. Because again, society and culture doesn't give them a lot of vernacular, especially for a boy to share how they're feeling. They don't know how to put words to I'm afraid, I'm ashamed. They don't know how to I'm embarrassed, I'm insecure, whatever it may be. They just know, life sucks. It just sucks, dude. You know, a lot of times that's as far as you get.
Well, you're saying this like in relation to adolescent young men and young women. I don't think that it's that much different for adults.
Oh, it's not.
We still don't give ourselves license to be vulnerable. And that was one of the main changing points in my life as a dad, was to look at another dad in the face and admit, I don't have this figured out. And, oh, you don't either? Like that vernacular, that culture of being able to say, man, I like totally lost my patience the other day.
Right.
And I don't know where it came from, but I didn't like it. And I'm not really sure how to deal with it. And being able to voice that out loud to another man without being judged for it. Right. I think it probably stems from the same thing, that when we were adolescent boys, not fathers, we were given kind of these parameters that you have to stay in, and you're not really allowed to feel those emotions. And we grow up with it. And then we're dads and the same rules apply. You're a dad and you've got to have this whole thing figured out. And in reality, none of us do. None of us do.
No, we don't. We're working on it.
It changes every day,
right.
And different challenges are thrown our way. And we have to be able to look at somebody in the eye and say, I would need help. I think you're right. When we do that, that gives our kids the license to do the same.
Us showing our humanity to them, again, allows them to be okay with their own humanity, and recognizing that, yeah, they're normal. I do the air quotes, but because there's no such thing as normal. But yeah, they're not freaks. They don't want to be freaks. That's the funny thing about teenagers too, is they want to be different and unique, but not too much. They want to be just like everybody else too. And so it's like that funny balance that they're going through. But as we've talked about before, they want to spend time with us. They want to connect with us. But unless we show them that we're like them, that's really hard. That's really hard to do.
So you're obviously connecting with the boys that you're working with, and you're trying to connect with your girls at home. What are some of the ways that you mentioned some outdoor activities you do with these boys? Talk to us about what are some of the ways that you're connecting, whether it be recreational or conversational, or how are you connecting with these boys and with your own girls at home?
That's a great question. It's something I was telling Kirk about earlier. I use a lot of stories, a lot of personal stories, again, to show that, I know what it's like, and I get it. I don't know what it's like to be a teenager in 2021, but I know what it's like to, again, feel embarrassed. I know what it's like to be ashamed. I know what it's like to be sad, depressed, those types of things. That's a huge key for any kid, is to be able to talk about the emotional piece. And recognize, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, but I know what it's like to feel what you're feeling. And that's a huge connecting point. As far as the boys go, I love going for walks, doing sessions, walking. I have a truck. Truck sessions are the best. There's something about a truck and a boy in particular, and maybe it's because they don't have to look in the eye. Honestly, that might be part of it. Is they can be looking forward. You can be looking at the landscape together, and it's not as intimidating. It's not as hard. Again, it's not that you're avoiding the emotion, but it's not as an intense process. And so car rides are great. With the girls, I was out weeding the lawn, weeding my house with my oldest daughter. This was probably 5 years ago, and she asked me to tell her a story about my growing up, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because every day I share stories with my boys at work. And I realized how pathetic it was that my girls didn't know these same stories. And I think we do that as dads. We give so much at work, and then we come home and our focus is somewhere else, or we want to relax. And there's no more important client that I have than my two girls at home. They're my most important clients. And so I've tried really hard over the last 5 or 6 years to share my stories with them. They may feel like it's a little much, but I think it's important to share your life with them. It's really easy for an adolescent to become very myopic, very self-centered. And so giving them an opportunity to get to know you better is going to help that connection. And then they're going to come to you more often because they trust. And they've heard your vulnerabilities. They've heard your stories. They know why you are the way you are. You're not just some mystery person that comes home at night. You're dad. And they know what's made you. I actually love for my boys at work to meet my own dad. Every once in a while we have an opportunity to do that. And to a T, they're always like, oh, I get it. I know why you are where you are. I know why you talk about these things, because I met your dad. It makes sense now. There was a study that was done while I was in graduate school, because one of the big topics then was, and this was the early 2000s, quality time versus quantity time. And it was one of my favorite studies. It was a big governmental study. They went and interviewed thousands of undergraduate students. and asked them, what was the most impactful experience that you've had with your parents? And then they went back to the parents and interviewed them. Majority of the parents didn't remember the experience because the experience wasn't the trip to Europe. The experience wasn't, this big baseball game that they went to. The experience wasn't about what the parents thought to be quality time. The experience was usually getting out of a conundrum, getting caught in the rain somewhere, a flat tire somewhere, overcoming some adversity somewhere together. And you don't get to pick when those things happen. So unless you're spending quantity time, the likelihood of actually having real quality time decreases.
Interesting. I like that.
It's fascinating because we as parents want to think, yes, we're doing this really cool trip with our kids. And that is wonderful. Those are great experiences. It's good for them. But again, it may not have the biggest impact. It may have a lot bigger impact. The basement floods and you work together as a family to clean out the basement and whatever happened through that experience. And so unless you're spending time, your quality may not be that quality.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about creating moments in other podcasts, which I think is super important. But what you're talking about is an authentic moment that wasn't planned.
Yeah.
And without some quantity, you can't have that quality, authentic, unplanned, spontaneous type of event.
Exactly. And again, I still think you can plan for quality and good, authentic things, but also get to seize the moment too. And there is a balance, especially with a teenager, of not overwhelming them with the intensity. Like, hey, you have this desire. So that's one of the big factors too, therapeutically, is what we call check-ins. We check in about how we're feeling. And so teaching the boys to check in, and really say what their core emotions are, what their hopes are. And so to have a check-in with your kids, hey, how are you feeling? But also share it as a dad as well. We were coming back from a vacation. We're heading to the airport. I'm a very task-oriented dad when it comes to vacations. I'm like, okay, I can sleep in Utah. Let's go. It was kind of a silent ride back to the airport. And so, okay, let's check in. What's going on for you guys? And my daughters gave me some amazing feedback. They said, Dad, sometimes you put tasks above people. I said, well, yeah, I do that. That stinks. I'm sorry. But they're the ones that wanted to check in. And so very often, we'll just have family meetings, family check-ins, and that's huge. Another governmental study that was done while I was in graduate school was trying to find out what's the most important factor for family unity. It's family dinners. And bringing up topics, again, tough topics, real topics, helping the kids know what's going on for you as an adult, some of the struggles that you're dealing with, so that they can work on that empathy. We talked about them being myopic. Well, a lot of that's because we shelter them from anything outside of their paradigm. So sitting down and having conversation, man, had to fire somebody today. That was hard. Let me tell you how it was for me, and let me tell you why I had to fire him, so that maybe you don't have to get fired someday. And also, when you have to fire someone, you know what it's like. Again, they're teaching opportunities, but asking the kids to do the same. When our kids were little, we used to do a peach in a pit. Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter, she'll talk and talk and talk and talk. We have to shut her down. My youngest is like, "How was your day?" "Great." "Anything else?" "No." "What's for dinner?" And so we had to start with doing, hey, what was the peach? What was the best thing of the day? What was the pit? What was the worst thing of the day? And not avoiding the pits either. Because again, we want to focus so much on the positive too often with our kids. And what's happening is, you talk about, what am I seeing in work? Seeing unresilient kids. And that's why substances, again, are so appealing. Seeing kids that don't know how to work through adversity, that see a failure as a catastrophe and very shameful, rather than an opportunity to learn from it, to pick themselves up and grow from it. And so helping our own kids at home to, yeah, that stunk. That was pretty terrible. What are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What's your plan to deal with it?
That came up last week with Ted, and I did that a couple nights ago with my kids. I was like, hey, kids, we haven't done this for a long time. We used to call it roses and thorns around the fire pit at scout camp. So we did roses and thorns, and it turned into like a 45-minute conversation where all 4 kids were at the table. Like, that hasn't happened for a long time at my house, because usually everybody's got somewhere to go, somewhere to be. And we said, hey, we're all going to sit down and we're all going to share something. And you're right. The things that are the thorn or the pit are really the window that you get to look through to see what's going on in your kid's life and why are they worried about that. You know, my youngest was, tomorrow, the best thing about today is tomorrow is the last day of testing. And the worst thing about today was today there was testing. And you know that 10-year-old girl is worried about the tests at school. Right. And otherwise, how was your day? Great. Yeah. What did you do today? Testing. But I don't know that she's worried about it until you kind of give them the license to say, worried about this. So
one more quick thing too about what we can do. One of the things we found is adolescents, kids don't learn how to deal with conflict very well too. They avoid it. Of course, they'll get online and say all kinds of things to different people.
Make conflict.
Yes, make conflict and hurt people's feelings, but it's not the same because you have to look them in the eye as you're making fun of them or something like that. You don't feel the human connection. You don't feel the emotion. It's too easy. But like face-to-face conflict, which is real, and it's actually pretty healthy if it's done correctly. But one of the things we see is that, again, parents aren't modeling conflict resolution at home very well. And often parents will, I know this was true in my home growing up, parents will fight, start off, usually something financial or something like that. They'll start to bicker, and then they'll go off to the bedroom or somewhere else, and the kids will go somewhere else. And then when we see mom and dad again, everything's fine, or as my kids would say, Gucci, everything's just fine. And they never saw it resolved. They don't know how it happened. They just know it did, which is great, but they don't see the steps of that resolution. All they know is something magical happened.
It's a good point.
And they didn't see it.
Because a goal of mine in my marriage over the last 18 years has been, don't let your kids see you fight. Like, I get along with my wife really, really well, and we fight very, 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 very seldomly. But when we do, I try to do it in private, and that's a very good point. It's like, where are my kids going to learn conflict resolution if I don't model it somehow?
Yeah.
So
a really good guidepost for that is a guy named John Gottman. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He is the marriage guru. He is. His stuff is amazing. The Gottman Institute. He has what's called the Love Lab up at the University of Washington. He can take newlywed couples and he observes them for 72 hours in this Love Lab. And he observes them, just doing the day-to-day stuff. And he can predict whether they're going to get divorced or not at a 97% accuracy. Isn't that insane?
Wow.
97%. You should go to Vegas with that. But anyway,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have to look into this. I'm thinking,
look into it.
Okay.
But he
sounds like a good investment for future son-in-law perspectives.
There you go.
Yeah. But he talks about, it's not how much they fight. It's not what they fight about. It's how they fight. He talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as he calls them. That if these 4 things are part of how they're fighting or their conflict resolution, they're probably not going to make it. And, you look into more, but criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are the 4 horsemen. Now, I'll be honest, like I struggle with a couple of those every once in a while myself, but it's more about being aware. And that's what therapy is, quite frankly. Therapy has 2 parts to it. Increasing our awareness, understanding, defining the problem. As Einstein put it, if you gave me a problem to solve in an hour, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. So becoming aware of it, what is really going on? And then take action, which is hard too. Because again, we're pretty ingrained, especially as adults, as dads, of the way we do things, the way we think things need to be done. But if it's not working, it doesn't. Yeah, we need to stop. But yeah, the Gottman stuff is really powerful, and in marriages and relationship, because it's not about what you're fighting about. It's how you fight. It's the rules behind it. The rules behind that conflict resolution.
I often tell people that my marriage is good because my wife's brutally honest, but I think it does go back to that. She's matter-of-factly honest.
Right.
And she never holds back. She just tells me, hey, this is how I feel about this, this is how I feel about that. I don't like this. I love that. And so I think I tell people all the time, I think that's why we have a good marriage, because my wife set the example of, we're just going to talk all the time about everything. And we never fight because we just talk about everything. But it's not, a competition or someone's right and someone's wrong. No, it's just a conversation. Right. And that kind of goes back to avoiding those four things in a in my simpler mind.
Well, it'd be really easy to get defensive if she was brutally honest. 'Cause my wife's the same way. She tells me what's up.
Yeah.
And I love it unless I'm insecure about something. And then I tend to get defensive about it. And what I found about myself is I get defensive. When I get defensive, I don't want to be that guy that gets all defensive. That's lame. Yeah, I don't want to be that person. But also, the action that I take personally when I start to feel myself getting defensive, there's something said that was true, and I don't like it. Like it hits at a core issue of mine, and I don't want to look at it, but it's there. So it has nothing to do with her honesty and her truth. In fact, that's what's brought it up. But it's more about a belief within myself, and that's why I want to get defensive. I want to battle that instead of look at it like I should.
Yeah, I look at problems at home and at business, actually, and a lot of those come down to insecurities. And I'm sure it's the same thing for a lot of these boys that you talk to, and like you said, sometimes people, they just don't want to look at it, but it affects the way they behave in a negative way, because they don't know how to deal with those insecurities. They don't know how to talk about them. They don't know how to get around them. So what kind of advice would you give to, kids with insecurities, or anyone with insecurities? How do you go about having the right language or having the right mindset to kind of look inward and say, I need to get out of my own way?
Right. Well, again, the comparison is so huge. It is guaranteed misery. I say that all the time, because what we do when we compare, we're comparing a lot of times our insecurities to someone else's strength. Every time I see Kurt, he's got an amazing, beautiful suit on. My suits kind of suck, they're kind of dusty and dirty and they're not that great. But no, it's like I'm comparing a strength of his to a weakness of mine, and that's not fair. And so helping them to compare, am I doing better in this area today than I did yesterday? That's the only fair comparison, is to ourselves. Am I going to work harder tomorrow to be better than I was today in this area? But again, social media, it's hard. And so sitting down with them and going through social media, and I almost want to say laughing at people, but laughing more about just the stupidity of some of the stuff. Like what do you think their intent is in posting that? Mm-hmm. What do you think do you think their goal is to say something like that, or to put that picture on there? What are they saying about themselves at that piece, at that point? And just helping them give a perspective, an adult perspective. That's one of my favorite things I do with my boys at work. Toward the end of their stay, they get their smartphones back. And it comes to me, and we sit down, and sometimes for a month, we will comb through their social media and what they were doing and most of the time, almost every time, they'll say, can I start a new account, or can I just delete all that, or can I never have a smartphone again? I'll just go back to the flip phone. It's like, I wish I could do that too. And so going through their social media and seeing it from a different light, because now they've had all this time of intense therapy and work on themselves, and they see themselves differently. And then it gets embarrassing. I can't believe I posted that. I can't believe I used to follow this person. Look how ridiculous they are. And so getting past that comparison piece. I think 2 is, again, having conversations with them that is non-shaming. I think it's an important distinction is between shame and guilt. Guilt is feeling bad for what we've done, which is pretty healthy, actually. You should feel bad if you do something that hurts someone else. Shame is feeling bad for who we are. And why that's so damning and hard is because a lot of it's hard to change who you are as a person. So that I'm a loser. I'm pathetic. I don't know how to talk to people. I'm socially awkward. I'm, back to something wrong about my character and my personality and who I am, rather than, I could have said that better. I was kind of mean when I said that. I need to apologize. The guilt leads to apology. The guilt leads to change, unless we shift the guilt to shame and make it about us and who we are. So helping our kids to feel guilty in a healthy way and not slide into that shame cycle. That's one of the biggest things I see is a lot of shame. And then with that shame comes a fear of failure, as we talked about before. It's like, I can't believe how many guys I work with that don't want to get a driver's license, that don't want to go out for that team because they just don't want to do something hard and they say it's stupid. They make it, that's lame. That's stupid. I don't want to do that. Like, are you kidding me? It's a total lie. They're not being honest. Apathy is always a lie, by the way. We always care. Now, the level of care may change, may ebb and flow, but we always care. And so when they say that they don't care, they're lying. And so call them out on that as a parent. Say, hey, what's really going on? Because you do care. And a lot of times it is that fear of failure. Because, again, failure isn't looked at as a positive thing. I'm sure the 2 of you have made a few failures in your life. And because of those failures, you're better men.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot before. I think in business world, I've said, you look at any extremely successful entrepreneur or any super successful sports person, anyone who's extremely successful in any way, and they failed more than anybody else, because that's it. You can't win unless you fail a lot. You can't have big time, amazing stuff happen in your life until you're willing to try and try and try and never give up. And you might call it learning instead of failure, but whatever you want to call it, you're going to fall down, dust yourself off, get back up. But only the greatest have done that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And so asking for help too is a key coping mechanism. Back in the old days before we had our phones and so forth, there was the old joke that the guy would never ask for directions, but the girl would. Like, who's the idiot? It's the guy, right? Who's the smart one? It's the one that admits they don't know.
Yeah.
Rather than pretending like they do and they don't. And so that willingness, dropping the pride and asking for help, and helping our teenagers learn how to do that without being rescued, because there's a difference. Because that's another thing I see way too often is parents doing things for their kids that the kids need to be doing for themselves. And again, creating a very weak, non-resilient child rather than a strong, self-confident, amazing kid. They question everything because they haven't been given the opportunity to fail, because they've been rescued over and over and over again.
Adam, as a therapist, what would you say to a parent who feels like maybe their kid needs somebody besides them to talk to, and maybe acquiring a therapist? What are good resources? What do you look for in choosing who to have your kids talk to?
That's a great question. As a parent, that would be hard. Like I put myself in other parents' shoes. And like, gosh, I'm pretty. Like, dang it, I can help my kid. And so I admire those that I work with so much that they got to the point where they were humble enough to say he needs more or she needs more. Looking who to look for and so forth. Scott Miller at the University of Utah, when we went to the University of Utah, did some really good research on what makes therapy effective. And the number one thing is the relationship. So the connection. So that's what I would look. You know your kids pretty well. Who are they going to connect with? Who are they going to talk to? Who are they going to open up to? The second most important thing is the model that they use. And it's not the model per se that one model is better than another, is that the therapist actually has a model. Too many therapists out there say, oh, I'm eclectic. I use all these different models. I've got this big toolbox and I just kind of pick and choose. And they're not really masters of any model, if that makes sense. And so they're not really doing anything. It's kind of like that friend that we all have that likes all music, but then they really don't know anything about any music. It's the same thing. And so in looking for a therapist, asking them more about their model, but not being as concerned about what the model is how well they know it and how they stick to it. And then really just, that gut feeling of, again, how's your kid going to connect with this person? And then being held accountable. How well is this person going to hold your child and you and your spouse accountable for that change? Because there's a weird relationship sometimes with therapists because they want clients, but if they do too good a job, they do too well, then they're not going to have clients.
That's so backwards, huh?
It is. And so, someone that be frank with you and say, hey, this is how long it's going to take. If that changes, I'll let you know. If it's shorter, great. If it's longer, we'll kind of see. But I think it's going to take about this long to get this problem resolved, or at least get it so your child is able to function the way that we want. And so someone that's confident in timelines is actually pretty important also, because I'm working with some parents, and the mom yesterday, she says, hey, this came up for me with my son as he was sharing this. And I asked her, I was like, how long are you seeing a therapist for yourself? She goes, yes. How long? 8 years. I'm like, get a new therapist. Get a new therapist. If they haven't helped you through this in 8 years, they're just taking your money at this point. So
those are having problems with drug abuse. I've heard that that's a little more of a long-term type of play than a short-term play. It's not a 30 days and everything's going to be better, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The 28-day model came up from insurance companies saying this is what we'll pay for. It has nothing to do with research. In fact, so many times I'll get on to do a pre-authorization with an insurance company, and they're going to deny it. They're going to, and I always say, show me the research. Show me the data that says that 28 days, 30 days, even 45 days is significant enough to deal with these issues. They can never answer it because there is no data that backs it up. The data talks about months, even a year or two. That's what the data says. But unfortunately, we're driven by the dollar too often. And insurance companies, again, I apologize to the insurance people out there, but it's just the fact that that's what's driving it, that piece. And so hopefully, that changes over time. But just know that going in that, the 28-day program, while they do some amazing things, it's an intervention rather than treatment at that point. And there is a difference between the two. Sure.
Adam, if you were going to put a bow on everything here at the end of this very informational podcast, with fantastic takeaways that could be listened to multiple times for a parent, what would it be, and how would you encourage parents today to interact with their kids?
Back to things I've alluded to before, being courageous, being willing to lean into hard conversations, not assuming that our kids are getting these lessons and messages from school or church or our teams, and that it's not coaches and teachers' jobs to be having these conversations. It's our job. And in doing so, we'll actually have a stronger connection with them. All too often we're afraid that if we have these conversations, it'll hurt the relationship, and that's the exact opposite. Being willing to share our own vulnerabilities and insecurities, be able to talk about our own life lessons and how we learned them, recognizing and then talking on an emotional level rather than a back in my day level. talking about how you felt when you failed, how you felt when you learned something that wasn't fun to learn, how you felt when you got left out from the crowd. And then also being empathetic too, without trying to make your kid into a victim also. And then I guess lastly would be, let's work harder to raise a resilient kid, one that knows what it's like to work hard, knows what it's like to fail and to bounce back, knows what it's like to be told, what's your plan for that problem, rather than let me solve this for you. That's one of my favorite things to say when a boy comes to me or my daughter comes to me with a problem. What's your plan? How can I help you with your plan? I'm here to help you. I'm here to direct you, but it's your life, and I trust that you can make good decisions.
It's a powerful message for any parent to give their kids.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for your time, Adam.
Absolutely.
We finish the podcast with a simple question to everyone, and that is, what does it mean to you to be a gentleman?
My definition has changed definitely over the years, especially raising two daughters, and them being in the dating age as well. It's something that I look for as a dad when boys come up to pick them up for dates. And one is being courteous while also being courageous, as I've talked about. I think being a gentleman too, you're accountable to more than just yourself. You're not selfish, but also you have a confidence and an air about you that you know who you are and you want others to be better, just like you're working to be better too. I think that's how I'd sum it up. That's
a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to listen to this with my kids and then pause here and there and talk about some of the things you brought up. Hopefully I can be more open and lean into those conversations as you mentioned. So I feel like this has affected me, and I appreciate your time a lot.
Thanks. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Well, as we wrap up this week, we recognize that last Sunday was Mother's Day and the effect that our mothers have had on us. We just wanted to say Happy Mother's Day to all of you moms out there, and appreciate the influence that you've had on all of our lives.
Go moms.
Also our wives. Catch us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Follow us on the Gentleman Project podcast, and we will release new episodes every Monday, and hope that you incorporate those into a routine and that they provide value to you. If you love the Gentleman Project podcast, tell your friends, write a review, and we'll talk to you next week. Make it a great week, everybody.